The panel CIF and the Future of Climate Action. So this will be a moment to take stock, not just of the two-day event. I know that all of you have been very engaged in different discussions. I had an opportunity to visit many of the breakout sessions. Really interesting discussions, both about challenges, but also about opportunities. And I must say, working more on the climate science side, when I go to conferences, it's a lot of doom and gloom. But when you come to conferences such as this one, talking about renewable energy, the opportunities, it's a completely different atmosphere. And it's striking, I must say. But it's also to discuss CIF's most important achievements over these past 10 years. Some of the experiences, learning that we can pull out of this, but of course also then focus on the climate action and the role CIF can have in the future. What can we do? How can we improve the system that we have to deliver even more and even faster? We have a nice panel to discuss these issues with us. We have Honorable Mustafa Garbaf, the Minister of Environment, Urban Safety and Sustainable Development from Niger. Welcome back to the panel, and applaud, I think, come on, yes. We have Mr. John Room, Senior Director, Climate Change, World Bank, and applaud, yes, welcome. We have Mr. Fiu Mataese Elisara, the Executive Director of the Ole Siosio Maga Society Incorporated from Samoa, welcome. I complained the traveling here from Stockholm, and the distance and the time it took, Samoa. I think, probably a long flight. And we are also very pleased to be joined by Mafalda Duarte, the head of CIF. Mafalda, I know we asked you to step in very late here, but we felt also that, some of the comments about CIF, it would be excellent also to get your perspectives on that, and maybe some comments, direct reactions, and so on. So we are pleased that you are here. So a warm applause also for Mafalda. So you have participated in different sessions here. We have discussed the achievements of CIF over the past 10 years. If we take that before we look into the future and so on, some key experiences, some messages, some particularly interesting observations from you first. Minister, can you start?
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais tout d'abord, au nom de la délégation du Niger, qui est constituée de 2 ministres et de plusieurs cadres, une bonne demi-douzaine, remercier les organisateurs de cette rencontre qui nous a donné l'opportunité de faire le bilan des 10 ans d'action du CIF. Alors, qu'est-ce que nous avons retenu durant ces 2 jours de discussion? D'abord, la confirmation de l'urgence à agir dans l'action climatique. Nous avons pris connaissance, même si nous savions déjà, des conclusions du dernier rapport du GIEC, qui a davantage secoué la sonnette d'alarme. Ce qui prouve qu'il y a 10 ans, lorsque le CIF a été engagé dans l'action qu'elle a menée, il y avait une pertinence dans les besoins et l'action a, les résultats à atteindre, à savoir qu'il y avait cette urgence de l'action climatique à agir pour la résilience des populations dans les États dans lesquels le CIF, dans lesquels il est intervenu. Nous retenons à travers le rapport sur le rapport transformationnel qui a eu quand même beaucoup de résultats en termes de transformation dans différents pays, que ce soit sur le terrain de la résilience des populations, mais aussi en termes d'instauration de bonnes pratiques dans différents domaines. La gestion des ressources naturelles, en l'occurrence la transition énergétique, entre autres. Ce qui concerne mon pays, le Niger, je dois relever que l'intervention du CIF à travers 4 projets a permis, dans un premier temps, d'aider à la prise en compte de la dimension changement climatique dans plusieurs politiques et stratégies sectorielles. Ensuite, l'action a permis de renforcer certaines bonnes pratiques, en l'occurrence en matière de gestion durable des terres et de la résilience des populations, surtout dans le secteur de l'agriculture. Ce sont des résultats très encourageants. Maintenant, il faut encourager le CIF. Je pense qu'il doit rester dans l'architecture du financement du climat mondial en renforçant sa participation au financement de l'action climatique dans plusieurs pays, en élargissant, si possible, son champ d'action, sinon à davantage de pays, mais au moins dans les pays dans lesquels il est intervenu, mais surtout en passant à l'échelle, à une échelle plus importante, en les développant donc les résultats atteints. Donc dans un premier temps, je pense que ce sont les premières impressions que je peux exprimer. Merci.
If I can just follow up on a question with you, sir. You mentioned that there was partly success in the fact that you have managed to get climate into various strategies. You also mentioned resilience, for instance, in agriculture, that came in as an important factor also in your strategy. How did that actually happen? What was the driver behind the success of getting these broader perspectives into, for instance, agriculture, bringing in that factor of resilience, for instance, in your strategies? How did it happen?
Alors, bon, d'abord, c'est un mouvement, il faut le reconnaître, qui est mondial. Lorsque, il y a quelques années, surtout après le sommet de Rio, la question climatique avait commencé à être secouée pour alarmer un peu la communauté mondiale et surtout africaine sur les dangers que courait la planète en ce qui concerne le réchauffement climatique. Très peu de leaders croyaient à la réalité donc, de ces risques-là. Alors, grâce à l'action il faut le connaître, de plusieurs partenaires, le CIF y a contribué, mais pas exclusivement, bien entendu. Le programme stratégique de résilience climatique a mené plusieurs actions qui ont concerné à la fois le renforcement de capacités des différents acteurs au niveau national et assurant ainsi une meilleure compréhension à travers différentes études, une meilleure compréhension de comment est-ce que les changements climatiques impactent le développement, comment les changements climatiques impactent la vie des populations à travers leur action quotidienne qui est, comme je l'avais dit dans ma déclaration d'hier, une population qui est essentiellement rurale et pauvre. Et les actions qui ont été menées sur le terrain, qui sont démonstratives, ont prouvé qu'il y a une réelle appropriation par ces populations de ces questions donc de changement climatique en lien avec leur mode de vie et en lien avec leur système de production. Les ressources naturelles, comment les gérer, comment rendre plus résilients par rapport à leurs besoins. Et c'est en ça que je pense qu'il y a eu une contribution positive donc, du CIF à la résilience des populations. Maintenant, l'intégration de la donne climatique dans les différentes politiques et stratégies, ça c'est déjà une volonté donc, disons des autorités nationales qui est exprimée ailleurs dans l'agenda climatique, mais qui a eu l'appui et le soutien donc, des projets financés par le CIF pour transformer ces actions dans le sens de leur prise en compte dans nos politiques et stratégies, et pas toutes, mais certaines dans le domaine des transports en l'occurrence, de l'énergie, de l'agriculture, et ça, c'est des avancées très significatives dans le sens de l'appropriation de la problématique du climat dans nos stratégies et politiques de développement de façon globale.
Thank you. So again, it's sort of going back to the success of integration, working much broader than just focusing on climate, but also working from the people's level, but all the way up also to policy. Interesting. John, maybe I can move to you in this regard. I know this is also a factor that you stress. You have a long experience from the World Bank. You have now also the experience of 10 years of CIF. What would you say have been the success factors that we really need to keep track on also when we move forward of CIF and of course maybe of the broader architecture?
Very good. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I think there are three things that strike me about CIF. First of all, the transformational impact that they've been able to have. Sorry, let me remove this.
Yeah.
It's echoing when you leave the headphones on. First of all, the transformational impact that CIF has been able to have on people's lives. Secondly, its continuing relevance. And third, the community that it has created. So on the transformational impact, $55 billion mobilized is not small change in anybody's language. But beyond that, CIF has been able to create markets, wind market in Mexico, CSP here in Morocco. It's not so much that you've got a wonderful power plant here in Morocco, it's that this stimulated the development of CSP elsewhere. Small and medium enterprises in Turkey, first mover in a lot of technologies, geothermal, lots of different countries. So creating markets that allowed things to develop that wouldn't have happened before. Secondly, systemic change, particularly on the adaptation and resilience. Niger, a fantastic example of where this was built into the main strategies and sectoral policies of Niger. But it's not just Niger alone. Mozambique, Tajikistan, Zambia, we heard lots of these examples. And this is exactly what's needed going forward. Third, it's a climate investment fund, but many of the benefits are not just climate. You get increased agricultural income. You've got reduced air pollution. You've got cheaper energy bills because of energy efficiency. The benefits are much broader than just climate. But it has also impacted individual people's lives. We've heard the stories from a number of speakers out here. It's very moving just to wander through and look at the pictures in the lobby here. These are real people we're talking about. Each one has a mother, a father, they've probably got kids, they've got livelihoods, they've got aspirations. We're not talking about abstract things here. These are really people's lives that they impact. And in the form of transformation, I think CIF has modeled the way on social inclusion. So you think about the DGM, working with indigenous peoples, empowering indigenous peoples, and the gender aspects of what CIF did. CIF set a very high bar to ensure that its investments were gender sensitive. But then that, frankly, even from the World Bank's perspective, we took that learning to shape our entire gender and climate program within the World Bank. So it's been transformative, number one. Number two, relevant. You can do transformation, but is it relevant? If you think back to what we heard about what we need to adjust to 1.5 degree world, the speed with which we need to move, and the significant transformation. This is not business as usual we're talking about. And I think what CIF has illustrated is an ability to do the kinds of things that we only need more of in the future. We don't need bread and butter investments. We need this kind of transformation at scale and at speed, and CIF has proved they're going to do that. And so I think they're a model for the kinds of more that we need in the future, so that continued relevance. And the third one is community. You know, I just look out here. I see ministers. I see MDBs. I see technical experts. I see donors. Okay, I see community members. A community has been created of dedicated professionals driving this forward, the smoothness of the running of the event. Every time we talk about something that happens in Niger because of CIF, it's not just the 35 people in CIF, it's not just the MDB task team leaders, it's not just the minister, it's not just the community. It's bringing that community together in a way that delivers as a whole. But it's also a community that celebrates each other's success. I've heard these stories that have become almost legend now of one country celebrating the success that another country had by getting their program approved and saying, well, what did you do that was interesting that I can learn from? But in that learning, to be quite candid about what is not yet working well and stretching the bar even further. Okay, we've done well now, that's good, but let's not get complacent. Let's think about what more we can do. How can we do things better? And so I think creating that learning, adaptive, committed community is fundamentally what gives me a lot of hope for the CIF, because we can always do a bit of technical stuff here, a bit of technical stuff there, but it's the people that underpin it that will drive it forward into the future, that will carry the lessons. So that's what I take out of it.
I mean, and this is fascinating because what you're saying is somehow reflecting a learning organization, because I understand that when you started 10 years ago, maybe this was not exactly the case. I mean, there is a learning curve, and what have been the critical success factors for that learning to happen within a structure like CIF, but also a structure like the World Bank then, because CIF operates within the World Bank. So what are the success factors to actually get where we are today for a mechanism such as this one?
So I think there are a few factors. So one is, I think that to be clear and to understand from the analytics that we're doing that we don't have all the answers. And so in order to achieve our objectives, we have to be a learning organization. Okay, we did not know how to construct a concentrated solar plant in Morocco. But if we're going to do it, we have to learn. So a core part of the objective is to build that learning into the process. Second thing is to create an environment where people are willing and able to take risks. But that just doesn't come from nowhere. So I think that there's a lot of credit due to the Trust Fund Committee to be willing to approve things that would take a certain degree of risk. Okay, not everybody believed in this CSP project in Morocco when it started. It was too expensive, there was too much concessional finance in it, can it really be done? But the Trust Fund Committee was willing to take a risk. Okay? And then people were willing to put resource behind it. You don't just learn from nothing. If you have a look at the budget of the CIF, there's money in there to do the evaluations. All of the stuff that you heard about today took money and resources to make it happen. And investing in that learning, I think, allowed it to drive forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Risk is a clear factor here, but having also all stakeholders, all different actors on board to really be able to push things forward and also support the learning of the organization. Could you also say maybe a few words about the organization you represent, out of curiosity? And then, of course, also some of the learning that you think you would like to share in terms of CIF and the success factors that we have seen, please.
Thank you. Let me first thank the government of Morocco for the hospitality that we've enjoyed in the last few days. And indeed, thank you, Mafalda and CIF, for actually inviting me. You know, I have actually traveled 45 hours of flying just to get here. So
the travel is longer than the conference.
To justify my being here. But my organization is dealing with sustainable development agenda, and we're pursuing those areas and become an advocate of the issues that are affecting local communities and indeed indigenous peoples and developing countries. But in terms of what we're here for on this closing ceremony, in the last couple of days, I think all you need to do is look around, as John was just saying. You know, this is a reflection of what CIF is about. The enormity of experiences here, the technicality that are here, the people from the communities, indigenous peoples, and even all the sessions in the last couple of days speak volumes in terms of what CIF is all about. And for me, in the context of climate change, an existential threat to us, more particularly from where I come from, a small island developing state, and of course, representing local communities, indigenous peoples. We are perhaps more at the forefront of climate change. And we get frustrated looking from the outside in terms of the global dialogue now, in our view, has sort of retreated, you know, in a lot of ways in terms of climate justice arguments that we have. But for CIF, that has become a real element of hope for us. It's really the light of hope that is giving us a lot of encouragement. And we, if I may say that CIF is like a doctor that actually generates hope for us in terms of the climate change issue. But having said that, having sort of listened to the presentations around, the thing that really comes to my mind in terms of what I'm hearing at the corridor, at the sessions, is that it's really the whole question of leadership on climate finance. With small staff, $8.3 billion, more than 70 countries, more than 300 projects, a delivery of 93% already in implementation phase. That's speak volumes. And at the cloud of the, what do you call it? Sunset clause or whatever that is. You know, you have spent about 30% of your time the last 10 years worrying about that. But even at that, you continue to do the work. You continue to have faith in the process. And I hope that there are some positive signs of the future of CIF as we move forward in terms of what that is all about. But the leadership, you know, in terms of at the global level, first of all, and of course at the country level where we sit. But from the global level, having benefited as one of the observers in CIF, we greatly appreciate the fact that CIF has actually paved the way for other climate financing to learn from them, you know, the climate models that they are presenting. I mean, GEF has learned in terms of its own governance about stakeholder engagement in the governance level. They have learned from them. Unfortunately, we've, you know, in terms of where I sit and the perception of CIF and the way that they have created a lot of the structures and what have you. And we were hoping that GCF will basically take that and hit the ground running. And unfortunately, that has not been the case. Even the issues of climate financing, and more particularly because MDBs are the face of CIF at the country level. And you have really created a wonderful atmosphere of actually getting them to work together. Even at the country level, that we have heard that political oppositions have been able to come together and talk very collaboratively because of the fact that your transformational change and your programming approach have actually forced many of our own countries to actually engage and to talk to one another. It's not about guarding turf. In the past, you have spoken very adequately and eloquently about transferring some of this pessimistic narrative into very powerful and positive examples of climate, benefits at the country level and even at the global level. So these are some of the messages I'm hearing and very, very positive about it. And forgive me for saying this, but if I may, I guess because climate is an investment fund, so we've spent the last couple of weeks very much focusing on investment side, on the economic side and the benefits that have been generated. There has been, in my view, as where I sit as a person from the civil society and indigenous peoples, we needed to have some balance on the issues of how that economic benefits are actually impacting on the lives of our people, on the limited and finite resources that the economic, aspirations actually depend upon. But the creation of the SAN, the stakeholder engagement network, it's very innovative, but it's something that you have created, and of course we hope that the other climate finances will actually buy into and become owners of that very initiative, because a lot of us go to different climate finances, and we need to have common messages. But to actually promote different messages can often be, not at our advantage. But from where we sit at the country level, one of the biggest, as I've said, is for the first time, we have been asked and engaged by the governments in their own national processes. I mean, there has been a lot of the rhetoric about, yes, we have consulted, we have done consultations, but some of those consultations don't really follow meaningful consultation that it should.
You would say that the work process has actually changed thanks to the sort of requirements that CIF has actually in terms of stakeholder engagement and so on?
I think it was not top-down sort of, you have to do this, but at least it has actually generated and been very catalytic in the leadership at the country level as well to actually integrate and to come together on an integrated approach, multi-sectoral approach, engaging everyone. Actually, in terms of our own community and indigenous people's engagement, you have been invited to be part of the dialogue at the country level.
Thank you very much. And after a sunset clause, always a sunrise clause will come, we hope. That's why we are here now. Mafalda,
thank you.
Clearly, I mean, it's maybe difficult to add something here. If you think the three panelists have missed something, I think this has been really a very strong message that CIF has played a very instrumental role, not just providing resources, but actually changing the structures and also challenging a little bit the architecture in terms of being more approachable, you could say, working more coordinated, being less fragmented, but also that having a broader perspective in terms of development and working with people from the top and the bottom. Something you would like to add, but also what I would like to, I'm a bit curious about, because you worked with CIF, as you said, from the start. What have you found to be the most challenging over the past 10 years, but where you have been successful? So, a challenge that you really found, this has been so difficult, but I have really succeeded, or we have succeeded as a team, as CIF. Please.
Yes, indeed, Johan, you're right. A lot has been said, and so there's not a lot to add from me. Maybe I add my own personal perspective. The reason why I have stayed for this long, trying to, as I said yesterday, trying to drive climate action with CIF support is because from the very early start, I realized the power of the mechanism. First of all, I was very committed, and it's my drive, my motivation to work on driving climate action. And from the very early stage, I found its business model to be very powerful. And I saw how it was being implemented on the ground and how, we were doing things very differently. I was doing development work before. And so, I had the experience of working within government, and I had the experience of working within 2 multilateral development banks. And what I was seeing is that we were doing things differently, and they had the potential to be a lot more meaningful and transformational. So there were a couple of things that, a few things that have been said, and that's why I spoke quite passionately yesterday about the business model and the 5 elements of this business model. What we are talking about here is not easy. No. This is not easy. Insisting on processes that are inclusive, that are about putting the countries in the real driving seat, empowering the champions, and ensuring that it is a requirement that there's a process that the MDBs come together in support of the government, that we are inclusive in bringing the civil society and the private sector. These are not easy processes. And this was business unusual. And takes time. So this is not going to be, so when we want an investment plan through such a process, this is going to take a lot longer than if it was done very quickly by one institution. But what we have realized pretty quickly is that the process in itself generated important ownership, engagement, and results in itself. I mean, Few was saying, for the first time, civil society organizations were being engaged, were being part of the process. Governments were listening to them and taking into account their views and their sense of priorities. Collaboration amongst MDBs. This platform actually in this architecture is quite unique. We don't have it. We don't have it. The requirement is multilateral development banks working together and bringing the best that they can offer to a specific country in a coordinated manner, and bringing along their expertise and bringing along their resources. And so, my message is, this is quite unique, and I speak from firsthand experience. This is quite unique and very powerful because, the results are visible. So the question to me is, as has been discussed as well, how can we even think in a context where we have this climate urgency, where we have a very narrow window of opportunity, and there's this urgency of scale and speed of actually not considering maximizing the power of the mechanism? You know, so to me, I think this is really important.
The key question, yeah.
This is a really important point. So, but you were asking, and I have to say one thing as well, I think John mentioned it, is the importance of this governance structure we have, these trust fund committees, because they kept us, the MDBs, everyone accountable to, you know, what the strategic goals were and how we were going about meeting those strategic goals. So all of the members, the donor countries and the recipient countries and the civil society organizations representing in this governance structure played a key role. Because we debated, you know, I remember several discussions about, okay, how you know, explain, how can we be hopeful that this will bring about the transformation we want? What's the theory of change? Explain it. Go back, articulate better. And so, you know, this governance structure played an important role as well. Now, you talked about what was the difficulty.
Well, the most biggest challenge, the hurdle that you have actually overcome. I mean, maybe this was the case, the very, you know, tough demands on you that you had to explain and really show and make a case for this broader, more integrated perspective. But otherwise, was there something else that you're particularly proud of, you could say? You know,
I'm proud of so many things.
Yeah, but if you choose one.
No, I mean, as I said, you know, I commend everybody for really being so committed to making, you know, to generating the results that we have achieved. Because as I said, we could have chosen alternative ways, which were simple, yes, and in many people's mind are more efficient because they took less time, they costed less. But we didn't decide to go that way. We really decided to go the way of let us really test a new model and see how impactful it can be.
Perfect. I think that is a good answer. I mean, that is tough to overcome, such a hurdle. We have to go for something that initially may look more complex, more expensive, but the gains will be larger. Let us now sit back and think that we are actually in 2030. Okay? You know, it's only 11 years from now. We tend to talk about the future. There was an American baseball player who said the future is not what it used to be. That's one aspect. Niels Bohr said the predictions are difficult, especially about the future. So, you know, the future is something over there. But we talk about 2030, we talk about 2050 a lot. 2030 is around the corner. We are saying we have these numbers, and they come up all the time, 140 to 175 billion US dollars need to be invested annually at that time. We hear about thousands of billions of dollars that need to be invested in infrastructure, more than the current stock. Huge numbers, 2030. So, 10 years from now, CIF 20 years anniversary. That's what we are celebrating. That's why we are sitting here, 2030, and celebrating this. Because there was a bit of a lax there, so it became 2030. What has been the success factor? What have we changed in terms of how we operate, the architecture? What are the success factors that will actually make it possible to reach the targets that we are setting for 2030? You know, really bending the curves of carbon dioxide, really investing in climate adaptation. Theo, if I can turn to you first on this question, because you are coming from a small island state. The urgency that you feel is clear. It was clearly also expressed at the Paris meeting, no doubt. One of the reasons we have the 1.5 report is, of course, of the SIDS really pushing for this, saying that we cannot accept 2 degrees. It's an existential question. So 2030, what would you see as the key success factors to really take us to this scale of investments that also would, of course, help your country?
I think from the CIF perspective, are you going to be existing by then?
Yes, that's rule number 1. There, you know.
We hope you do, because they have justified their, the existence. The fact that the donors have actually reduced their climate change portfolio by 37%. They have given CIF in 2015, something like $33 billion, and in 2016, $38 billion, compared with the $100 billion that per year that was promised. And I think in 2010, John, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I read a report on the World Bank that says that adaptation alone you need $600 billion.
Yeah, exactly.
Mitigation alone you need $600 billion. And technology transfer you need $500 billion. So I mean the enormity of the problem versus the resources that can be mobilized to address that is immense. And therefore, as we move forward, the question of promises versus the reality is really important. I mean, climate investment funds is an investment, so funding is so important. And if it's not only what we've said, but predictable, additional, and flexible, these are the kinds of things that we need to actually have some accountability on in terms of what has been promised on the climate portfolio. But from where we sit, if I can use, I think many of you have heard the story on what an investigative journalism is, that you really need to put your finger on the problem, but be very careful that you don't put your finger in somebody's eye. So where we sit is we've been very frustrated.
Yes.
And we, despite the fact that we don't want to put our finger in somebody's eye, we always have that tendency. But the fact that CIF has actually created some confidence as to actually do otherwise, it's certainly something that we look forward to in terms of going forward. But for CIF, you have really now set up a whole plethora of experiences, of expertise. How can we actually now move forward and actually facilitate the sharing of those? Yeah. Find a way of actually do a north-south, transfer of technical assistance, technical know-how, the advisory capacity, and indeed the south-south transfer of knowledge. And I'm really happy because, right now there's the fact that CIF has the guts and, the boldness to actually get itself to be evaluated and then be able to have that as a basis to self-direct its course is very positive. And the fact that there is ongoing program on learning the experiences, it's huge. And we hope that some of the programs that have already been approved but with no funding as we move forward can be funded. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that we would like to see as we move forward. But certainly in terms of 2030, where's the money?
That's the simple question. Minister Garba, I mean, you also face huge challenges. We talked before also in the previous panel about the fact that it's both about mitigation but also adaptation, and you mentioned also resilient agriculture and so on. So 2030, scaling up of finance, really making sure that we reach the targets we are setting. Where do you see the success factors for this, and how do you see that international climate finance and the structure can actually deliver those results?
Alors, je suis d'accord avec vous que 2030, c'est déjà demain dans l'agenda climatique.
Even for a politician.
Pour tout le monde. Alors, il faut déjà relever que le dernier rapport donc, du groupe intergouvernemental sur le climat nous a révélé déjà que même si nous mettions en œuvre tous les engagements pris à l'occasion de l'accord de Paris, nous ne sommes pas sur la trajectoire de la réduction de 2 degrés à l'horizon 2030. Et je crois qu'on se prépare probablement à la prochaine conférence des partis à demander aux partis de rehausser les ambitions. Donc de revoir à la hausse leurs ambitions. Ce qui signifie encore plus de financement. Or, comme je l'ai dit, d'une part, les États africains pensent qu'il y a encore des questions qui n'ont pas été correctement réglées. Leurs préoccupations n'ont pas été suffisamment prises en compte en l'état actuel à l'accord de Paris, notamment la question sur l'équilibre entre l'adaptation et l'atténuation. Même si, il faut le reconnaître, il y a de plus en plus de consensus sur la question. Mais il y a encore des États, des pays développés qui ne sont pas encore tout à fait d'accord avec ça. Alors, ça va demander beaucoup de moyens. Je vous ai révélé que dans le cadre de la commission climat pour la région du Sahel, qui est constituée de 18 pays, l'évaluation du coût de mise en œuvre des CDN à l'état actuel nous demanderait à l'horizon 2030 près de 400 milliards de dollars. Chiffre qui est complètement au-delà de la possibilité de financement des États. Et de très loin inférieur à ce qui est attendu des pays développés, même si les engagements pris à l'occasion de l'accord de Paris étaient respectés. Donc on a pris déjà beaucoup d'engagements. Alors, et c'est pourquoi, je l'ai mentionné, et il faut s'en féliciter, l'Afrique a de plus en plus compris la nécessité, d'une part, de parler d'une seule voix pour faire valoir cette nécessité, d'abord de prise en compte de la nécessité de rehausser l'ambition en matière d'adaptation, mais également les ambitions des États développés en termes d'efforts de participation au financement. Et à cet égard, je révèle que la Commission climat pour la région du Sahel, que le Niger préside, a élaboré un plan d'investissement climatique pour la région du Sahel qui va être adopté le 25 février, donc dans moins d'un mois, par les chefs d'État et proposé à un sommet, à une table ronde de financement le 26 février, table ronde à laquelle certains partenaires ici présents sont invités. Donc il y aura besoin de beaucoup d'investissements. Et nous pensons qu'il y a lieu d'abord de régler certaines questions, notamment les questions de transparence, du rehaussement de l'ambition, oui, mais à tous les niveaux. Les ambitions des pays vulnérables, des pays en développement que nous sommes, en termes d'atténuation, oui, d'accord, mais en prenant en compte nos réels besoins en matière d'adaptation. Mais le rehaussement de l'ambition des pays développés également, qui sont, il faut le dire, à l'origine du réchauffement climatique, c'est eux qui émettent les gaz à effet de serre, à rehausser le niveau de leur contribution au financement de l'action climatique. Mais en plus de cela, il faut forcément restructurer l'architecture du financement climatique actuel. Il ne faut pas parler en termes de compétition, ce n'est pas une compétition entre les organisations, c'est beaucoup plus de réorganisation pour les rendre beaucoup plus efficaces et complémentaires. Et aujourd'hui, nous avons démontré que le CIF, qui est quand même là, qui a démontré une capacité d'action et de résultat, ça existe. Certains fonds sont pour le moment en balbutiement. Des questions restent encore à régler quand on ne sait pas. Alors c'est comme si aujourd'hui on nous dit voilà, il y a un malade qui est là, qui a un médecin au chevet de lui, qui l'aide quand même à se porter mieux et à avoir le moral. Et on lui dit bon, attendez, il y a un meilleur médecin qui est formé à la meilleure école, qui a plus de moyens, qui va venir abandonner. Mais non. On veut bien, mais en attendant, on a ce médecin qui est là, qui nous soigne, qui nous aide à nous porter mieux. On va le garder jusqu'à ce qu'on ait un meilleur médecin. Je pense que c'est comme ça qu'on doit raisonner. On ne doit pas jeter ce qui marche. On n'abandonne pas une équipe qui gagne. Donc, restructuration de l'architecture du financement climatique mondial, plus de transparence et quand je parle de transparence, c'est pour rendre beaucoup plus accessible et, comment dirais-je, traçable les ressources des autres instruments qui existent, tels que le Fonds vert pour le climat. Pour le moment, je pense qu'il y a quelques mois, les pays africains ont fait l'évaluation de l'intervention du Fonds vert pour le climat à Bamako, et tout le monde a dit on ne comprend rien. On ne sait pas comment ça marche, on ne sait pas comment accéder à ces fonds. Donc il y a encore, quelle que soit la volonté que les gens ont de faire fonctionner le Fonds vert, pour le moment, il y a encore des questions à régler. Eh bien, faisons en sorte que ça marche, mais pour le moment, gardons ce qui marche bien. Merci.
Thank you very much, John. There were a couple of quite, clear messages there. Let's keep what is working. Let's make sure that we don't always ask for a more complicated doctor. Was that the case? Or, someone else when we have the resources there. Transparency. And try to get rid of competition. This is, of course, the case now when we have more and more organizations. You are in the middle of all this in the World Bank, of course. I mean, you have all these different connections and you have the understanding of the system. So when you look ahead 10 years, what is it that you see as critical points here? I mean, apart from what the minister is raising.
Reid, thank you. So I think both of the two previous speakers made some very good points. I'm going to try not to repeat them, but have a slightly different take or approach it from a slightly different angle. What does the world need to look like in 2030 or 2035 if we're going to deliver on what we need? We're going to need countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, where ministers of finance and planning are overseeing budgets that are allocating money for health, education, agriculture, water, that fully take into account the climate change and resilience that we're seeing, that these programs are well-funded with significant amounts of money in them, and they're based on integrated strategies that take a city-wide view or a landscapes-wide view. Take parts of the Sahel, okay? You need the agriculture, the water, the security, all of this stuff coming together in a way that allows this to move forward. That's where we need to get to. On the mitigation side, we're going to need to see the deployment of a whole bunch of new technologies. Battery storage. We're going to need to see microgrids all over Africa, parts of Indonesia, that allow both energy access on a 24-hour basis, powered by renewable sources, with batteries to make it happen. That market has to be developed. We're going to need cooling solutions, so that the need to bring cooling and air conditioning is not going to blow our carbon budget. We're going to need to start seeing in more emerging economies a much greater share of electric vehicles. These things, I believe, that by that point in time could be commercially viable, and we could be having this funded through purely commercial means. We could crowd in the trillions of dollars that are sitting on the sides, earning low or negative rates of interest, and being used for productive purposes. But neither of these two things are going to happen automatically.
No.
We have to keep putting the right policies in place, the right technical assistance, and the right financing. And some of that can come from the MDBs. As I talked about earlier, as MDBs, we've made large commitments to put money behind it. But let's be frank. For all the MDB money, and for all the leveraging of the private sector financing we're talking about, and for all of the mainstreaming and increased repurposing of government budgets, we need a significant chunk of concessional finance money in order to make this happen. And certainly to make it happen in the speed that we're talking about. Yes, batteries will develop, but do we want scalable batteries in 5 years' time or in 25 years' time?
Exactly.
If we could use that concessional finance, we can accelerate this discussion. I'm sure there's many ministers here who've had to deal with these decisions. They've got to pass budgets. They've got to deal with their clients. And if you're looking with a technology that's currently more expensive than the alternative, extremely difficult to move, extremely difficult to prove the case. If you have enough concessional finance to push it over the edge, you can make this happen much quicker. You can drive down the cost curves. You can make it happen. You can integrate things into government budgets. You can get your colleague in education or health or agriculture to do things they would not otherwise have.
And how do we get that concessional money?
Okay.
What is the
So we've got
barrier?
to mobilize that money, but it can't just be an ask.
No.
Okay? It has to say, part of that quid pro quo has got to be that concessional finance is going to be used in a very targeted way. Not just, I'm doing something for climate, therefore I need concessional finance. But this is just the amount of money that I need in order to make it viable. And there has to be a quid pro quo deal with the donors that this is where this is going to happen. Second thing is that money is going to have to be made available in a low transaction cost, predictable way that actually utilizes the mechanisms that we have in place for the MDBs. And this is what happens from the CIF. This is what we have from the CIF. I'd like to pick up the point that the minister made. In order to deliver everything that we've talked about, there is no one silver bullet of finance.
No.
Okay, it's not just the MDBs, it's not just the Green Climate Fund, it's not just the CIFs, it's not just pension funds, it's not just commercial banks. We have to put that whole architecture together in order to make the whole puzzle work. Each one has their complementary roles and responsibilities. There are ways of putting this stuff together. So these arguments over, can the private sector do it alone? It's all about the $100 billion. It's only the Green Climate Fund. It's only this. This is not the way the world operates. The key issue is how do we make all of the bits and pieces come together to deliver on that.
And success factors for that? I mean, as you say, it happens, and we have seen it happen. Also, we talked about some cases over these 2 days. What are the sort of critical success factors there?
If I had a simple answer, we wouldn't be sitting here. But let me outline a few pieces. Yes. So one is, I think there needs to be a clear understanding of why this is important and what does it take to make transformational change. And here there's a huge contribution from the CIFs. As I spoke with Mafalda and the team, all of this learning and evaluation work, if it's only for the CIFs, it's not relevant. It's really relevant because it tells us a lot about getting this action. So we need to understand the mechanisms and how this works, and it has to be owned and understood in people's minds so they understand it. That's number one. Okay, number two, we then need a bunch of politicians and senior bureaucrats to make courageous decisions. Greta Thunberg, this 15-year-old from Sweden, said it right. Okay, you can't just lament climate change. You've got to be able to take some bold decisions. And I think we're going to need, over the next, it's easy for me to say, we're going to need some people to stand up and say, we're going to make some bold commitments in order to address these issues. We're going to have to drive this. And then we're just going to, some of it we're just going to have to, we can't just keep focusing on the future. We're going to have to find some concrete, I've talked about what things look like 2030, but if we only think about 2030, it's too far out. Yeah. We have to translate that into what are we going to do 2019, 2020, 2022, and build the confidence. So what I would argue is we should ensure that we can get enough concessional finance to drive this transformation, focus on 3 or 4 transformative areas, those countries that are ready to move, demonstrate what can happen, build confidence in terms of what's happening, and you then get on an upward spiral rather than a downward spiral.
Yeah, so it's really a process, backcasting, and then basically...
Yes, and then driving it. I would also, just in closing, what I'd like to do is, you know, there are some politicians who are much more articulate than I am about what this opportunity is, and some of my colleagues know that I quote some of these people a lot of times. We've talked a lot about Mozambique here. And I like to quote Samora Machel. Samora Machel said, "A luta continua." Okay, that means the struggle continues. This was the catchphrase of Frelimo in the Liberation War. Okay, so everybody thinks the struggle, yes, there's a struggle, and it continues. But there's more to that quote. The second part of the quote basically goes in English, victory is assured. So it's not a luta continua, woe is me, it's terrible. A luta continua, we're in there, and we're going to win. Okay, and I think this is an attitude that we need to adopt, and we need to keep pushing. Okay, the second person I love to quote, and this is my water bottle. Okay, it has some writing on it. Okay, it's good because it's not plastic, but it has a whole bunch of Nelson Mandela quotes. Okay, and I think that these are really telling. So the first one is, it always seems impossible until it's done. Okay, that's part of the history of the CIFs, and it's part of the future of the CIFs. Okay? The second one says, after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. Again, we've climbed a lot of hills. There's a lot more that are coming. Third one is, there is no passion to be found in playing small, in settling for a life less than what you're capable of living. We have to think big in terms of how to go. And then, in case I'm making this all sound very easy, the last one is, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. And so I think that we can clearly look to these two African leaders for what the messages are going forward. And this, I think, okay, we can talk about the technicalities of it. You can argue, all of this is important. All the technocratic stuff is important. But either we're going to put the political will behind this to address it, or we're not.
Excellent.
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for that. Time is running. We have looked at the achievements of the past. We have looked at some of the barriers but possibilities for the future, what we need to overcome jointly, together